Welcome to Married to History, where we try to be informative, entertaining, and family friendly.
Aloha! I'm Christopher. I have a fancy piece of paper on my wall that says that I know more about history than most people do.
I'm Shirley. I'm a homeschool mom that relies on good curriculum, Christopher, and Liberty's Kids to teach our kids history.
No, I think those cartoons are actually pretty good. Before we get into our episode, let's take a minute to talk about something from a past episode. It's important to keep in mind that Shirley does not warn me ahead of time about our topics, and I try every dirty trick in the book I can think of to try to get her to give me some kind of clue, something, so that I sound a little bit less unorganized.
You are welcome anytime to plan out a really good episode, like a script, and present that.
That would get rid of the challenge, though.
Exactly.
I enjoy the challenge.
Me too. It's fun for me to see what he knows right off the top of his head, and that means sometimes we miss things. If you would like to hear a more comprehensive and well-prepared episode on any topic, just let us know. All right, honey, so I have just two things that were brought to my attention from a listener, our friend Rebecca.
Mm-hmm.
I think she's our most loyal listener.
Cool.
Probably our only loyal listener at this point.
Loyalty should be rewarded.
Okay,
we should get her some cake.
So first of all, she pointed out, really, she just pointed me to the dictionary of what the origin of the word turkey is for the bird, the American bird that we eat.
Okay.
Right? So obviously this is from our 10th episode about the Ottoman Empire. I was making a really dumb joke about where we get the name turkey.
Mm-hmm.
Okay,
I'm sure that every child in every grammar school across the globe has probably, or at least where they pronounce it turkey and they know what the English word is, has probably made this joke or asked this sincere question of their teachers.
Yep. Okay, so here you go. So the word turkey that we use to describe the bird native to America that we eat at Thanksgiving, it comes from the name for the African guinea fowl, which was a bird that was brought through Turkish territory, and they would call it it became called a turkey cock or a turkey hen. Mm-hmm. And so
turkey cock and hen I've heard before.
Yeah, so that word turkey got mistakenly used for the American bird when people were introduced to that. Now there's a lot more that goes into the origins of that word, it's kind of complicated, but that's the simplest way I can put it. Okay. There's a cool article on theatlantic.com called Why Americans Call Turkey Turkey, and it explains it all.
Cool.
Yep, pretty neat. So there you go. And then the other thing that Rebecca pointed out was another really cool thing that we should know about Turkey, more than just the Constantinople Istanbul song and large
so this time we're talking about the country.
Yeah, so the country of Turkey.
You got to be clear with me.
I was getting there. Okay. You could have just let me finish.
Sorry.
I would have made myself clear.
Sorry.
Okay, have you heard of these underground cities in Turkey?
I've heard of underground cities, but you'll have to be more specific.
Okay, it's super cool. So the one that she pointed me to is called Derinkuyu. I'm sure I'm pronouncing that wrong. The important thing is that there are at least 200 cities underground in the mountains of Turkey, and they're all connected with this tunnel system, and these cities and tunnels are at least 3,000 years old. And they could house thousands of people.
Cool.
It is super
That sounds like
neat.
something to see.
Yeah. So I encourage people to look those up. I did find one YouTube video that was claiming that they were a lot older than 3,000 years old. But then it started feeling like Ancient Aliens type territory. I feel like that's the direction the guy was going. So I'm maybe not the best, most reliable source. But anyways.
Yeah, because heaven forbid anybody should ever believe that mankind actually looked at a mountain and said, you know what? I wish I could go through this.
Yeah. Yeah, it was getting a little weird. But anyways, so that was really cool. Honey, I have a history question for you.
I love history questions.
Okay, so I wasn't sure if this would be a good question to ask you since you don't like the Muppets, but I'll give you a chance. What was the Manhattan Project? And when the Muppets took Manhattan, what effect did that have?
Oh my goodness.
What?
All right. I have no knowledge, zero whatsoever of any of the details in the Muppets Taking Manhattan.
Neither do I. I really don't remember the movie
I know
at
I've
all.
heard that title before, but yes, I know absolutely nothing about it. I do not care for Muppets. I remember I was a big fan of Muppet Babies cartoons when I was
that
a
was
kid.
a good one.
But otherwise, no, not a fan. All puppets are soulless creatures that still do things though, so that's wrong.
Okay, did you like that? Did
So I'm not saying that like all Muppets I'm preparing for a Child's Play scenario going on, but they don't have souls and yet they move and they talk and they look at you.
did you like that Big Bird movie where he like?
Ugh.
Do you remember the Big Bird movie?
Yes, you
Oh, that
put
was
it on
the
for the
best
kids so many
Muppet
times
movie.
that I can't look. I
That
can't
was the
look
best
at him.
one. Where they're trying to find Big Bird.
Okay, stop talking about it. You make me
I'm
all
sorry.
uncomfortable.
But okay, so what's up with the Manhattan Project?
It was not in Manhattan. That was just the name.
Seriously?
Seriously.
It's not
okay.
even in Manhattan.
I can't say for sure that there wasn't any part of it that didn't have something to do with Manhattan, and I know I don't know all the pieces. If I remember correctly, two of the biggest places where Manhattan Project related stuff was going on was in a made up town in Kentucky or Tennessee, I believe. I don't remember the name of the town.
What do you mean a made up town? Like
It was not a
it's
real
fake?
town. Yeah, they made the labs and then they
Like
built the
empty
town around
buildings?
it to make it look like a town to protect it from spies and espionage.
That's really smart.
And
actually.
then there was the testing facilities out in Nevada or New Mexico, wherever they were doing the nuclear tests out in the desert.
Okay.
And there were probably lots of other places here and there where they did smaller amounts of work or the research. But yeah, I do not know every place. And to the best of my knowledge, none of the actual physical work of the project took place in Manhattan. I could be wrong, but I don't believe anything did.
So what is the Manhattan Project and why was it called Manhattan Project?
It was probably called the Manhattan Project just as a code name.
Just random words.
I honestly don't know how, especially during World War II, they came up with so many of their code names. I'm hard pressed to think off the top of my head of one that I know of that like made absolute sense where you can tell that's why they called it that. Other times it might have just been for lack of a better word, random names given to this, that, or the other thing.
Okay.
The only one that I remember off the top of my head that made sense was Ultra. Ultra was a British top secret.
MK Ultra. That's a phrase that I remember hearing.
I don't know about MK. MK Ultra sounds like a video game or something.
No, I don't think it is.
Oh, okay.
Anyways,
Sounds familiar.
so what's Ultra?
Anyway, Ultra was a British special project, the group that was in charge of, amongst other things, breaking the Enigma code. I think there were other projects they were working on too, but their top dog, their biggest thing was breaking the Enigma codes, was being able to read the German messages. And it was called Ultra because Churchill wanted to indicate its level of secret. So it wasn't top secret, it wasn't most secret, it was ultra top secret.
Seems a little obvious. Okay, so I looked it up. MK Ultra, that's a branch of the CIA that was doing the Stranger Things experiments on Eleven's mom.
Yeah.
That's MK Ultra stuff.
Huh. Cool.
Yeah.
All right. So why it was named the Manhattan Project, don't know. But the Manhattan Project was the build. Now I might be getting this wrong because I know there were a couple other names that I have gotten confused about from time to time as far as what the research was doing. So I don't remember if the Manhattan Project was a smaller project of the whole thing or if the Manhattan Project was the all-encompassing thing.
Okay.
But essentially the Manhattan Project was to do with the building of a nuclear bomb.
Oh, okay. So when was this? World War II, you said?
This was during World War II. So they finished the prototype during World War II. Unless I'm mistaken, they were experimenting with it before World War II. Now that I've said that, I can't think off the top of my head of what year the tests would have begun. But yeah, they eventually, we know from history that they finished it during World War II, and they used the first two fission bombs on Japan to end the war.
Okay.
So if I remember correctly, we have evidence that the Nazis were experimenting with it too, but they, especially during the ending of the war years, because of attacks against Nazi infrastructure, they weren't able to get the sufficient amounts of the materials that they needed to conduct tests on it. And I
That's
believe
probably a good thing.
I believe there were some other groups that were working on it too. I don't know about the Soviets or the British off the top of my head, but the Soviets would be the next ones to figure it out, and then the British after them, if I remember correctly, figure out nuclear bombs. But yeah,
Okay.
that's essentially what the Manhattan Project was. It was the building of fission bombs. To be clear, fission bombs, not fusion bombs.
What's the difference?
Fusion bombs would come much later. Fusion bombs are, if I understand correctly, a heck of a lot more destructive. Fission involves splitting an atom, so that's what Einstein figured out how to do. He figured out how to split an atom. Fission bombs where they split atoms to create their destructive force. Fusion bombs are what the sun does. Instead of cutting atoms apart, it smashes them together.
Oh.
Both processes, cutting it apart and smashing them together, release lots of energy, and that's what creates your blast.
Oh, okay.
So the fusion, unless I'm mistaken, when we think nuclear bombs, or at least when I think nuclear bombs or atomic bombs, I think of fission bombs. I think of the bombs that we dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Hydrogen bombs, I believe, are another name for the fusion bombs.
Oh.
Because for the sun, like I said, fusion is what the sun does. Well, the sun is mostly hydrogen. Fusion.
Okay.
But for fission, unless I'm mistaken, you needed uranium or plutonium, and they probably have other materials that you use for it now. But at the time, the first bomb, Little Boy, was a uranium bomb, and Fat Man, the larger one, was a plutonium bomb. So
I didn't know they were different substances. Okay.
Yeah, if I remember correctly, they were. I don't remember which way it was. Either they were worried that the scientists were worried that they didn't, or not the scientists, the weapon makers, whoever they were worried that they didn't have enough uranium, so they used plutonium for the second bomb, or was the other way around? They were worried they didn't have enough plutonium, so they used uranium in one of them.
Huh. So at this point, World War II, we're talking late 30s and 40s.
We're talking late 30s, early 40s,
Okay.
from America's standpoint.
From America. So did we have like nuclear reactors for power plants at this point, or is nuclear completely new?
We did have nuclear reactors. Plutonium, if I remember correctly, was only made in primitive nuclear reactors. It's not to my knowledge, it's not a naturally occurring element. So that's the only reason why we had plutonium. But as far as like nuclear power plants, I don't know. I do not know what we were using our early nuclear understandings for prior to their usage as bombs.
Okay.
I am not familiar with nuclear power plant, or I take it back. I'm familiar with nuclear power plants, but as far as the history of when the first one was built, or the first time that we used nuclear or atomic energy for anything other than the bombs, I'm not familiar with.
When did nuclear...
I believe exit signs are nuclear powered.
No, they're not. That's neon. Wait, it's neon. Isn't it neon?
I took an exit sign to a junkyard one time, and I smashed the heck out of it with a sledgehammer.
Why would you do that?
I was a bored kid, and
So
I don't remember
stupid.
why we were there. We were there to smash stuff, so that's why I didn't think there was anything wrong with it. And I seem to, my memory tells me that after I was done smashing it and I was like picking through the pieces, I pulled out this yellow rectangular thing that had that nuclear warning symbol on it.
There's no way. I'm going to look it up. What is an exit signs? Okay, but while I look that up, when...
Maybe I was confused. Maybe I was so young it was actually like that biohazard sign, and I thought it was the nuclear sign. Anyway, so from that point to this point, I kid you not, I'm not embarrassed to say it if somebody out there proves me wrong on the matter. I have thought that exit signs were nuclear powered. I'm not talking like, okay, we're ready to destroy Hiroshima again, nuclear power. Like just enough to they never have to replace the batteries.
Right. I mean, that would be helpful because you always want the exit signs.
The exit signs to be working, yeah. So again, that's another reason why I think I probably bought it. That makes sense.
Oh, okay.
I'm right.
Many exit signs contain tritium.
Tritium. Okay,
Tritium.
I believe that's a hydrogen.
It's a naturally occurring reactive isotope of hydrogen. You're right. So
nuclear fusion, baby.
It's not...
Exit signs are nuclear. All you nerds who are listening, and we're gonna lecture me and say, nah, they're not nuclear. The history guy just out-scienced you.
Tritium exit signs will glow without electricity or batteries for more than 10 years. I had no idea.
This reminds me of those times where I've said that, history has gotten me through a lot of my science classes. I passed physics, not because I understood the physics of it all, but because, I learned about Aristotle. Yeah, I remember his theories.
Oh my
I learned about
gosh.
Newton in history. Oh, I remember his theories too.
My high school physics teacher was the best because I don't remember if he was actually a veteran of a war. I feel like he was, but I'm not going to say that and risk being wrong. But anyways,
Yes, because we don't want to risk being wrong
I would
on this
never, I
show.
would never risk being wrong. Um, but when we were learning about like, when you throw a bomb, it's not going to go perfectly straight to your target. It's going to start curving down because gravity is going to start pulling it down. So things like aiming bombs, it takes a lot of math. And so when we learned all this math, then for our practical application of the math, he put all the lab desks together in the crude shape of an airplane. And that was our B-52 bomber. And he had us climb up on the desks, half of us on the desks, and we threw paper bombs at the people that weren't on the desks. So we had a B-52 bomber day. He was obsessed with B-52
cool.
bombers.
Kind of going back to that when we were talking about catapults and trebuchets.
Yes.
Yeah, they would have to release their projectile
yeah.
before the arm went straight up and down vertical because then, it's just going to toss it into the ground instead of tossing it at the target.
Yeah, lots of math. Okay, so anyways, I was going to ask you because I know that submarines are powered by nuclear power. When did that start?
I believe all of our submarines are nuclear powered. So I don't remember the date. I want to say 51 or somewhere around there.
Past the war then.
Yeah, it was the first time that nuclear-powered submarines come into being. So during World War I and World War II, all submarines are diesel submarines, with one exception. At the very end of the war, so late in the war that the Germans never really got to take advantage of it, they came up with the Type 21. She was the first electrical submarine. She still had
electricity and water. Sounds like a bad combination.
She still had diesel engines, but her primary function was to run off of her batteries, and the diesel engines were just to recharge the batteries.
Oh, that makes sense.
So they had to use, prior to the Type 21 submarine. This is a misunderstanding that a lot of people have about submarine warfare. Everybody thinks that submarines fight underwater. No, most submarines actually fought on the surface.
Really?
They fought on the surface using their deck guns. They would only diving was how they would hide from a dangerous foe, not how they would hunt. So that's not fair. They would hunt underwater, but they'd still more often they'd surface and use their deck gun to attack a target, and they'd save their torpedoes for something bigger or badder, and they'd hide under the water and then shoot at each other. But that would be because they were diesel powered. They had batteries, but the batteries weren't that big, couldn't hold all that much power, so they have to keep resurfacing, not just to be able to run their engines because they need an exhaust pipe, they need to be able to vent those fumes out so that they can run the engines to recharge the batteries, but also so that they could exchange the air. The Germans...
they didn't have O2 scrubbers or whatever sci-fi calls them.
They had them, but for whatever their reasons, they didn't employ them. Or, well, okay, I should amend that. I don't know when they had that technology, but that is something that goes into the Type 21.
Okay.
So again, tail end of the war, another thing about submarines before the Type 21, they were all built to run on the surface. They could dive and operate underwater, of course, but their main design was to operate as a surface boat.
Quit burping. I can't edit that out.
Sorry. So the Type 21, revolutionary. She was another example of just the science just going, just blowing up with innovation all at once.
Yeah.
So she was built to operate and fight underwater. She was sleek all the way around. She didn't have deck guns to create disturbance in the water. She didn't have rails around the towers for the guys to hold on to. She didn't have various parts sticking out of her to just create odd bumps and surfaces and whatnot. No, she was sleek to help her be quieter and to move more quickly through the water.
More aerodynamic.
She was larger because her belly was full of immense batteries, lots of batteries. And the diesel engines were not hooked up to her engines to be her primary source. They were hooked up to the batteries to recharge the batteries. the engines were attached to the batteries. And to make sure that they didn't have to surface very often, they had this ingenious invention that they called the snorkel. That it was an air.
Wait, is that the first time a snorkel was invented?
I don't know if that's the first time the word was used,
Okay.
but they called it the snorkel, and it had an air pipe going straight to the diesel engines. It didn't connect to the diesel engines. This meant that it had a straight air feed into the engine room that went all the way up to the surface.
Yeah.
It had a ball mount on it, a rubber ball mount on it, so that when the submarine dives, that ball floats up and plugs the hole so that water doesn't come in. But anytime that they're high enough, but the main body of the submarine is still under the water, then the shaft opens because the rubber ball drops and they get air. And again, wasn't directly connected to the engine, so that this way, if during rough seas, for example, and suddenly, the ball gets closed up and the air feed ends, well, the engine could still operate without interruption because it can still suck in the air that's immediately around it from the engine room. And because now this meant that, we have this thing that can stay underwater longer. She doesn't have to resurface to charge her batteries anymore. Well, now what are we going to do about the air? So they, at some point before the Type 21, they found out that they can use, I believe it's lime, as an air scrubber. So they installed air scrubbers all throughout the ship. Because the lime would absorb the carbon out of the air, leaving just the oxygen.
I seriously thought that was a sci-fi only thing.
Nope. They came up with it
That's
at the tail end,
to
at
me.
least, of World War II.
That's amazing.
So going back to the original point that you asked me, the Germans built the Type 21. Again, it was another example of an ingenious weapon, but too little too late. If I remember correctly, only one, maybe two of them were worthy of sea or for action before the war ended. Only one of those two actually left and went out into the ocean to go do anything, but it failed to sink any ships before the war was over. If I remember correctly, the captain of that ship, he wrote down in his journal, and some of his sailors probably described the experience too, they were trailing an Allied convoy. They were testing their submarine, and sure enough, they were right in the middle of this convoy. They could tell, these guys have no idea we're here. This is easy pickings. But by the time he realized that, hey, we're in the perfect position, we can destroy these guys, the hour mark for when the ceasefire was to go into effect had hit. So it's like, we can't do it. So, but they still got a little bit of a victory out of it in that he ordered his crew, all right, guys, surface the boat, and all the allies in the convoy are like, where did this come from?
That's crazy.
So the Allies were quick to snatch up every piece they could of the Type 21. I believe anything that they couldn't secure, they destroyed. The Germans also probably destroyed whatever they could before the end of the war.
You don't want the enemy to get all your technology.
And so the Type 21 ended up being the model used by the Americans to build the USS, you're going to love this, the USS Nautilus. The first nuclear-powered submarine. Instead of using a diesel engine to recharge the batteries, they put a nuclear reactor in her.
That's cool. Now, I learned, the kids and I actually went on a field trip to a nuclear reactor, and apparently...
Yeah, you were telling me about this. This is cool.
That was the coolest field trip ever. So, anyways, the guy was saying that these nuclear subs, they can stay underwater for 3 to 4 months. And that's only because that's how much food and water they can store at a time. If the subs could hold more food for the crew, they could stay underwater basically indefinitely. They don't need to surface except to resupply. Crazy. It's amazing technology.
It is.
So if things like nuclear subs and nuclear power plants didn't come before nuclear bombs, if
they at least weren't widespread.
Okay.
Subs definitely not before nuclear bombs. I don't know about power plants.
Okay, so since this is very science heavy, maybe you don't know this, but hypothetically, if we hadn't have done the Manhattan Project and built those bombs that caused so much destruction, would we have the nuclear sub technology that's so useful today?
I would hope so. I would assume that even if we didn't... I'm going to answer it like this. Most scientific breakthroughs that have come about in history have been because of military usage as weapons.
Right.
Because it's usually the military that has the desperation, the desire, and the funding, the resources to conduct these experiments to try to find something new, something that will work to defeat the enemy.
Right.
So I suppose it is entirely possible that had it not been for a military need, nuclear capabilities might have been something that just got brushed under the rug. Heck, it might have been something like, oh, if anybody tried to do anything with it, somebody would have decided, but that girl, Mary Curie, she died. They would probably have said, look at her, she died because of this stuff. Let's not play with that. And it might have just all gotten buried.
Yeah.
But I would hope that somebody would have come along and found a non-military usage for it.
Yeah, might have just taken longer.
Might have taken longer yet. And then, and more than likely, if the military hadn't developed it for bombs first, and a civilian had first created it as a means of power or energy, then it only would have been a matter of time before the military then turned it into a weapon. Either way, you would have had both.
Yeah. Did you know that her research notes and stuff are so radioactive that they're kept in like a lead box?
I did not know that.
I want to say that her body is in a lead coffin too, because I know that like the radium girls, who that's a topic for another day. Like if you test what was the Geiger counter? You test for radioactivity above their graves, it clicks a lot.
Do you know why it's called the Geiger counter?
No, why?
Geiger was the name of one of the scientists in the earlier days of studying atomic theory.
Oh.
So, and by atomic theory, I mean atoms, not nuclear.
Okay.
I don't remember which one he did. I want to say he was one of the guys that did the experiments that involved the discovery of neutrons inside an atom's nucleus, but I might be wrong. He participated in one of the studies that they did over the course of us learning about atoms.
Oh, that's
and so
cool.
Geiger counters are named after him.
Naturally.
Yeah.
Okay, so on the topic of nuclear bombs, you've mentioned Little Boy and Fat Man. So now this is something that I remember that you taught me this, and it blew my mind. When Pearl Harbor was attacked, I always had it in my mind that we went and bombed them within the week. That America took those bombs to Japan within the week. How long was it?
It was not 4 full years, but about 3.5 years.
That's insane.
Yeah, Pearl Harbor is attacked at the end of 41. The bombs are dropped August of 45. So yeah, a little shy of 4 years.
That's just so long. So much can happen in 3 or 4 years. So much can happen.
Yeah.
But so like those two events are so tied together. But timeline wise, they're so far apart. What were we doing during that time?
Fighting. Fighting on the beaches, fighting in the air, fighting on the oceans.
Were we still developing the nuclear bomb technology? If we had it sooner, would we have dropped them sooner? Or was that finally just we're done with all this little fighting, let's end it?
So that's an argument that still goes on to this day. I doubt there will ever be an ironclad consensus among people, well, maybe 1,000 years from now when they judge us harshly by whatever their morals are of about 1,000 years in the future. They'll have a consensus about it. But no, so we know that FDR was fully aware of the Manhattan Project. He knew what they were doing.
I would hope. He was the president.
He knew what they were doing. He wanted these weapons. He approved of all the testing and the funding for it. But if I remember correctly, Truman, his vice president, was not informed about these.
Okay.
If I remember correctly, Truman had no idea these things existed until he was told, hey, we've tested them successfully. They're ready.
Top secret, and he wasn't... Cleared for the...
So I want to be clear.
Wow.
FDR was president for... he was elected president 4 times, so he potentially would have been president for 14 years. He did not have the same vice president during all that time. I believe he had 3 different vice presidents.
Did he
had
fire
at least
him
2.
each time?
No, if I remember correctly, the guy who was his first vice president ran against him in one of those elections.
Okay.
So that's probably why he didn't serve as vice president again.
Yeah.
And then I think, this is where I don't remember if Truman replaced that guy or if there was a third guy and Truman replaced him. I don't remember off the top of my head. But yeah, for whatever reason, if it was a matter of trust or if it was a matter of didn't think he needed to know, Truman was not told about these bombs. He, if I remember correctly, did not know they existed until after the tests were successful and somebody informed him, hey, we've got this thing. Because even in the beginning part of the war, everybody in the United States Command believed that, all right, this probably cannot end without an invasion of the home islands.
Oh.
And that's going to be messy. This is something the United States has never done before. We have fought big wars on our own continent. We have fought the big wars to a degree on islands, but we have never fought a big war where we actually, with the exception of Mexico, and that was a much different scenario. War was arguably a heck of a lot simpler back in those days. We had never fought something on such a grand scale that we would be invading another country's homeland, another significant industrial, powerful country's homeland.
Okay, so we're scared.
And as the war goes on and we get closer and closer to the home islands, it becomes more and more obvious by the tenacity with which the Japanese are fighting that despite the fact that it's becoming clearer and clearer, like everybody, even the Japanese should know, this is not going to go well for you. You are going to lose. American military might, numbers, power, our weapons, we just had too many of them. The Japanese lost their advantages after Midway. They were already losing them, but after Midway, all their advantages were pretty much sunk. And it was just basically a slow-moving steamroller after that point.
So all of this that you're talking about, Midway and everything, that's after Pearl Harbor?
Yes, it's after Pearl Harbor. Okay. So again, as we get closer and closer, not only is it clear that the Japanese, for whatever their reason, they're not surrendering and they're not going to surrender. It's also made clear that they are going to fight hardcore. And we had photographs from spies and espionage and whatnot. We have video even of women training with spears in the streets. We have pictures of children being trained to use machine guns. We know that on the kamikaze spirit, the Japs had plenty of planes and new kamikaze pilots were being trained every day. We knew that kids even were being trained to strap a landmine to themselves and run under that tank.
That's
and
horrifying.
You thought the Russian dogs were bad.
No, and I've heard of this, and it is so horrifying. It's one of those things in history that I kind of refuse to believe. I guess I can't think of it.
So yeah, they had a dedication which is enviable. Their dedication is, I think, is very, very enviable. That is an admirable level of dedication they have.
Just to fight to the death.
But unfortunately, to such a lost cause.
Ugh. But they didn't know that. They didn't know that we were developing nuclear. That we would have this.
Oh yeah, they did.
End it all.
They had no idea that was going to happen. Unless I'm mistaken, the Japanese main theory from the beginning of the war, they had the impression, especially coming after the 20s, that Americans are weak-willed. We have no stomach to fight. We don't like long wars. We want to go back to our parties and our drinking and our movies and our dance halls. So even as the war is going on and the Japanese know they're losing, they are still convinced that we'll eventually get to the point where they're going to chicken out and they're going to go home and leave us be. So yeah, nobody had any idea that the nuclear weapons were a thing. And so going back to what we were talking about earlier, so from the beginning, the Allies are wondering, it's like, okay, how are we going to do this? How are we going to defeat Japan? Invading the home island, it's looking like that's going to have to happen, but there is no favorable scenario that we get. If I remember correctly, the most conservative numbers I recall ever hearing was that if there was going to be an invasion of the home islands, we were looking at least 2 million dead Americans, at least 10 million dead Japanese military, and at least 15 million civilians. That was the most conservative estimate of what it was going to cost.
So that would have crippled Japan.
That would have crippled Japan. That would have likely crippled Japan beyond mercy, not just because of the population, but because of the destruction that would have happened on the land.
All the infrastructure and stuff.
Yeah, not that it was all in great shape already by that point, because the Allies have been bombing everything. But yeah, I think that would have absolutely devastated Japan and would be.
But the bombs devastated them anyways.
The bombs devastated 2 cities. Sorry, the atomic bombs devastated 2 cities. And just 2 cities.
So I don't want to be funny about this because this is not that far distant in our past. And I know there's people listening that could potentially feel emotional about this. Are you saying that with the hypothetical numbers, like no nuclear bombs, America finally puts Japan down, that might have been a bigger loss than we got by using the bombs?
So yeah.
So the bombs were merciful in a way?
So this is... So this is the argument that I mentioned before we even started about this that
Yes.
still goes on and is probably going to continue to
Okay.
go on for a long time. There are plenty of people out there that say, nah, the bombs were the right thing to do. That was the right
Okay.
thing to do. Truman was a good man for doing that. And there are plenty of people out there today that say, no, the bombs were ludicrous.
Yeah.
That was a monstrosity. That was a shame on Truman and the
horrifying.
United States for doing this thing. And we are probably never going to get to an agreement because
Okay.
people disagree
You
about things.
just can't know.
I personally am on the side of I think it was the right move.
Really?
Not just because of the casualty count, but because this brought the war to a quick end. It basically was Truman being able not only did it protect American lives, it protected, assuming the calculations were correct,
Yeah.
it protected Japanese lives as well, because even though a lot of Japanese people did die, not as many as were predicted were going to die. One of the
That's interesting.
one of the strongest arguments, or I shouldn't say strongest, one of the most common arguments that I've ever heard against the validity of dropping the atomic bombs was that the Japanese were ready to surrender. They saw the end coming. They were ready to surrender. This is not true.
They weren't going to
Or at least
surrender.
all the research that I've ever done, and I've seen pros and con arguments on this. I'm not convinced that they were going to surrender. I am absolutely convinced they were not going to.
That makes all the difference.
So even after the atomic bombs were dropped, we know from records that the emperor, who usually doesn't have a say in thing, Japan was basically run by the military by that point in time.
Okay.
The emperor was a figurehead. The emperor called a private council together in which he called, I believe there were 6 people that were there. At least half of them were military. I don't remember who the other half were. And the vote was split. 3 were even. This was after the bombs were dropped. 3 were in favor of still fighting to the end,
Yeah.
and the other 3 said, "No, let's surrender." So even after the bombs were dropped, it was only 50-50. Are we going to surrender or not?
Wow.
I am, and again, everything else that I've read and seen tells me that no, there is no reason to believe the Japanese were ready to surrender. While the Allies were getting closer to them to the home islands, I think they were absolutely committed. A significant enough portion of their population were absolutely committed to fighting the fight.
Wow.
It was only at that meeting that, in a rare coincidence, that one of the guys, I don't know who it was, one of the people there asked the emperor, "What do you think?" You didn't do that.
Really?
You don't talk to the emperor directly. The
Okay.
emperor's voice is too... I think a movie said it like this once. The emperor's voice is too pure to be heard by us lowly people.
Even during this World War II period?
Yes, even... Most people in Japan had never heard the emperor's voice before.
Oh, wow.
In fact, it's when the emperor... for the first time that most Japanese people hear their emperor for the first time, when he gets on the radio for the first time to tell his people... We've lost. We're surrendering.
Whoa.
Most people had never even heard his voice before that, much less seen
Yeah.
him or anything to that nature.
And in contrast, like by this time FDR had done all those fireside chats and stuff, right? And that's the same time period.
Yep. So
Wow.
to go back to that idea that some people say the Japanese were ready to surrender, another piece of evidence that they tend to use in this argument is that Russia had invaded the Japanese holdings in China and Korea, so they saw the end coming from both directions. That is also not true. Okay, so I want to be clear. Japan never did declare war on Russia. Germany wanted them to, but they never did.
Okay.
Japan, if I remember correctly, Japan invaded Mongolia, but Mongolia, with Russia's help, beat the Japanese out, and the Japanese decided at that point that, all right, we don't want to go north. Russia is not a bear we
Really?
want to pick a fight with right now. So
Bear.
so if they did have any plans for invading Russia, they scrapped them all
Yeah.
and focused on the rest of Asia instead.
If they
So-
had attacked Russia in the winter, things would have been different.
Things could have gone very differently, yes, if they had attacked. Because you're getting me way
I'm
off
sorry,
topic
no,
here.
don't go on this
Well, no,
tangent.
real quick, I'll say this. We know that one of the only reasons why Stalin took so much of his Far East forces away from the Far East and put them in to fight in Europe was because his top spies in Tokyo told him, yeah, the Japanese have no plans against
Yeah.
us. So Stalin could
convenient.
afford to take all those guys and ship them over to fight Germany.
Right.
All right, so anyway, getting back to...
Sorry.
So yeah, the Allies wanted Russia to help them out in
Yeah.
Japan, and Stalin did say that, yeah, okay, I'll do it. But never did. His
Yeah.
army was stationed at the Japanese border, didn't move.
Okay.
They moved, if I remember correctly, it was the day after or 2 days after the first bomb was dropped. All of a sudden they went in.
What? But
It is my belief, and a lot of other historians agree with me on this, it is my belief that Stalin thought, that, like I was explaining to you with the Allies,
Yeah.
that, all right, they're going to have to invade Japan, and this is going to take a while. This is going to be a war
Okay.
that's going to go on for a couple more
Yeah.
years to beat the home islands into submission. So
Yeah.
Stalin was in no hurry. He knew that he could sit back and let the Allies bleed a lot more
Yeah.
before doing anything. Then all of a sudden, he hears about this bomb being dropped. Oh, crud. The Japanese might surrender. And he wanted to make sure that he had a seat at the surrender table. So all of a sudden,
He had to pretend
one
to be
day or
in
2
it.
days after the bombs are dropped, then all of a sudden the Russian army goes full speed in. But again, that was
Wow.
after the drop, not before. So the Japanese had no reason to believe that Stalin was going to get involved.
Wow. Okay. So where do the Muppets fit into all this? Were they?
They were soulless monsters.
Did they design the bombs?
I'm sure some people out there would say that yes, soulless monsters design the bombs.
See, there you go. It all links back together. Oh my gosh. Okay. So Truman didn't know about the Manhattan Project, but then he was
To
like,
the best of my knowledge, he did not know about it until after
Yeah.
the successful test, and then he was told about them and decided to
full
use them.
steam ahead.
If I remember correctly, he ordered their deployment as soon as he heard about them.
Dude. Awesome. Well, thank you. Is there anything else that I should know about the Manhattan Project or nuclear war?
There's a lot. Hopefully, we'll never have to learn more about
Yeah,
nuclear war.
for real.
I know there's a lot that goes into the Manhattan Project. A lot more details than I've shared. A lot more details than I probably know or ever did know. So yeah, if it's something that's interesting to people, by all means, get into it. Like off the top of my head, I want to look it up again because I can't remember what the name of that town was and whether or not it was in Kentucky or Tennessee. But yeah, there's a lot. There's a lot to World War II in general.
Yeah.
Every story that I could spend an hour telling you about something that happened during World War II, I guarantee you there's hours and hours more of other stories that were necessary for the one that I told you to get involved.
Right.
Like I've said this before, there are plenty of people that know more details about specific things than I do. I am sure there are hundreds of thousands of historians out there that know far more, not just about the Manhattan Project, but every little detail
Yeah.
that went into it than I do.
They could tell me what the Muppets have to do with it.
I hope that they are more merciful to you than I have been when you ask them about Muppets.
I'm sure they wouldn't be.
I don't know. Do we know any nuclear physicists in our family and friends?
Nope.
What about your brother? He thinks he's real smart.
Which one?
Yes. The one that works in the custodial arts. I think he's the smartest of them.
He's pretty smart. He's a
Oh, but
stay-at-home
then
dad
he's
now.
the one that's not your brother, though.
That's true. He might be my favorite brother. All right, let's stop there. Thank you for listening. If you liked what you heard, then please subscribe, tell your friends, and leave us a 5-star review.
If you'd like to hear a future episode with more information about today's topic, contact us on Gmail, Facebook, Instagram, or TikTok at Married to History Pod.
Also, please contact us if you have a silly question idea or if there's something from history that you would love to learn about.
And just be sure you're not drinking a glass of water when you're supposed to be reading off of a script, or specify in your message if it's a silly or serious question, because we don't want to treat a genuine quest for knowledge as a joke.
Talk to you next time. Bye.
Bye-bye. I still think I have frostbite.
You didn't get frostbite.
It felt like frostbite.
Yep.
Seriously, I'm so numb. Do you have any idea how hard it is to grab a little tiny screw with frozen fingers?
You weren't supposed to grab it with
rotate
your fingers. You're supposed to use a wrench.
It's in an area that was too confined, so I couldn't get much movement out of the wrench, so that's why I tried to get in there with my fingers. But yeah, I couldn't get it in. The number 3 couldn't get at it either, so yeah, I had to go little by little with the wrench. That's why it took so long. That's why we were out there forever until I got frostbite in my hand.
I'm sorry.
Okay, so yeah, the skin isn't black or anything, so I don't really
You don't
have
have
but
frostbite.
my hand still feels cold. My hand never got cold in the desert.
I'm Shirley. I was going to start reading yours, even though it's highlighted yellow.
Oh, go ahead and say it.
No.
Because I will challenge you right now to the claim that you have a fancy piece of paper on the wall saying that you know more about
I
history.
have this memorized, but I don't know why I looked at yours and then I
You haven't
freaked out.
memorized? Why were you even looking?
I don't know. I'm
Are
Shirley.
you okay? You seemed genuinely frustrated right there. And I'm
Frustrated
making
with
sure
you
that we're cool.
that I can't move on.